Welcome everyone. In this, I'm gonna show you step by step how you can build an ASP.NET Core application, Dockerize it, put it into some registry, and then build Kubernetes application from that Dockerized container. So let's see step by step and first understand what is the approach here. Now for me, I need few things. So I need a development box. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to use Linux machine. Specifically, it is Ubuntu. And I have created this Ubuntu VM in Azure. So that VM resides in Azure. What I also need is VS Code, which I'm going to connect to this machine. And the VS Code is locally available. So it is local laptop. So in my local laptop, I do not have any Docker runtime, any .NET Core runtime or SDK, anything of that sort of thing installed. I only have a simple editor VS Code, and using an extension which VS Code provides called Remote SSH, I will be able to remote in to this developer machine, remote into this Ubuntu VM from the Visual Studio Code and do the development. And once I create the ASP.NET, Dockerize it, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to push it to some registry. I will choose a public registry because then I don't have to provide the Docker credential while creating the Kubernetes pods. Otherwise, I need to provide Docker credential as part of the Kubernetes pod creation, and that requires YAML file and cannot be done through the CLI, the kubectl CLI. So that's why I'm gonna avoid that part. But if you have a private registry and your Docker image is in the private registry, you can pretty much go ahead and create a Kubernetes application using the Docker credential as a secret in Kubernetes and then pass it on within your YAML file as part of the pod definition. So we're not going into that complexity. We're making it simple. And in this case, I will use Docker Hub. Okay. So I'll use Docker IO. That is Docker Hub. So this is commonly known as Docker Hub. Anybody can go and create an account, and you'll be able to upload public uh, images. You can have only one private image. Okay, that's the Docker Hub. I'm going to leverage that. And then once it is in Docker Hub, I'll also deploy this to my already existing Kubernetes cluster, that is AKS. And all of this will happen through CLI. So I'm not going to use any of the UI thing. So it's all CLI so that you understand the DevOps approach towards it and how you can do that. So let's see step by step. I'll show you where my um, Azure subscription lies, and then I'm gonna open the portal and show you that experience. Okay, so here it is, and I say portal.azure.com, and if I open this, log in to my account, I have got a subscription, and inside the subscription, I have a resource group. So let's just jump into the resource group straight, and then I go into the resource group where my Ubuntu machine is. So this is my development box, and this is the machine I'm going to use. Okay, so this is the virtual machine already created. I've installed the Docker runtime. I've installed the .NET SDK. I've installed kubectl, everything I need for this. Okay, so I have a script on how you can do that. So we are not going to recreate the whole environment. So this development box can be your laptop also. So I just happen to create a separate machine so that I can play around with it and kill it whenever I kind of create a mess around it, and I can build a fresh one and then start working immediately. So that's the reason. So I have got a public IP address. I'll use this public IP address to connect to that VM. Now let me do that. So I'm going to use the WSL, that is Windows Subsystem for Linux, which is a Linux kernel running locally in my Windows 11 laptop. Okay, so I'm using Surface 2 laptop, and it is running Windows 11, and inside of which I have a WSL, which is part of Windows operating system, which can run different flavors of Linux operating system. So you can see that. Now to connect to that VM, so I'll say SSH, and I provide the username and the IP address, and it should automatically take me inside that VM. I'll say ls, I see this, and I create a folder. So for this demo, I create a folder. Say I say demo, right? I say cd demo. I also have .NET Core installed. So if I say .NET, you'll find that it shows me the option. That means the .NET Core is installed. To check what are the SDKs I have, I can say list SDKs, and it shows this version 6, which is the latest one already installed. Now I can go ahead and create a simple ASP.NET application called um, demo web, maybe. So to do that, I will run a small command. So it says .NET new. Now, if you say .NET new, it gives you a couple of templates. One of the templates is web app. I'm going to use this. So I can say that .NET new web app is the type, name is demo web, and no HTTPS. This will ensure that the security certificate validity and all this notification, which is absolutely not required for any development purpose, will not be there. So if I say this will go ahead and download the template, create a project, and make it ready. And it's going to create a folder called demo web. I need to go to that demo web. Now inside that demo web, I'm going there inside the demo web, and I see a couple of files folder created. I can also run .NET build. So if I do that, it's going to go ahead and restore the project dependencies, build it, and if there is no error, it'll be fine. I can also try running that, but since it is a headless server, it doesn't have a browser, it cannot run it. So I will not be able to check it over here using localhost because I need a public IP address. I need to expose it through NSG, and all those complexities are there. But you can see that it is running without any hassle. Okay, so .NET Run is basically running my application. All right, so let me come out of that. Now, what I essentially need to do is that I need to add a Docker file, which will be the build instruction for Docker. And then it's going to go ahead and, let's say, have my application ready for container, and I can build it and make a container image and push that container image. So I have a Docker installed and running in my local machine. So you can see the Docker CLI is running. If I say Docker PS, it will show you a couple of Docker images are already in the containers are running. If I say Docker images, you will find a couple of images already. So because I was working on it, so you can see that it is there. So you can easily read it out from the list, right? Now Docker is installed. Now what I'm missing here is the ability to do the development. I do not have an editor here. Because it's a headless server, I cannot install Visual Studio Code over here. I need a desktop to do that. But in my local machine, I have the Visual Studio Code here. So you can see that the Visual Studio Code is pretty much installed in my local machine. And what I can do, I can just go ahead and connect to, so let's say I close the folder, and I have a fresh new Visual Studio installed in my local machine. And for the first time users, for the Visual Studio, you need one important extension, that is remote SSH. So if you type remote SSH, you'll find in the list of extensions, there'll be an extension coming up, right? Remote SSH. So I have it, so I don't need to install it. So it is there already with me. Now to connect to that machine which I need to work on, what I needed is that I needed to copy the IP address I need to connect to. And I go to my Visual Studio Code and I use the command palette. Okay. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to close all these pop-ups and remove this and let the Visual Studio be fresh and clean. And I am going to do Control Shift P and it shows me the command palette. This is known as command palette. And one of the command palette options says remote SSH. As I type, you can see that it is coming up. If I try to connect to that remote SSH, right? Once the extensions are activated, let me connect again. I can add a new host. So this is already added. So if you use this, it is already added. So I'll show you how that file looks like. So this is the file where the information is added. So this is where the remote host is added. So you can see that username is defined, the public IP address is defined, name is also defined. So Ubuntu dev VM. So if I give a name to my host and close it, and if I say remote SSH, you can see that Ubuntu dev VM is showing up and it opens another instance of the Visual Studio code. So what it is now doing is that it is opening the remote SSH, which means that it'll SSH into that dev VM, wherever that VM is. If I can connect and then let me pass the password. If the password is correct, it will initialize it and then point to the Visual Studio Code. Now, if you open the terminal window for within the Visual Studio Code, right? So let me show you that terminal window. It basically opens that Ubuntu bash shell. Okay, so you see that Ubuntu bash shell is getting opened. And if I say ls, I see the demo folder. I can go directly to the demo and then I can actually open the web over there. So the project is demo web. If I go to the file, open folder, it'll actually browse into that mode. Okay, so if I say demo and then I go to the demo web, it would open the folder in my Visual Studio Code editor for editing. So this is the developer experience. And that's how developer will make changes to the file. So it is again asking me to provide the password. I provide them correct, and it is checking if I trust this. And I say yes, get a consent, and hence you see all the files. So you see the files available over here. Okay, you see them all, and one thing you can see that you have the index ch HTML, and I just say reduce demo so that I can show you something other than different one. One thing I also wanted to check is the port it is going to use. So if I use this, then you can see that 5056 is the port it is using. So we'll remember that and come over here and add the Docker file. Now, if you type Docker and then it shows you the add Docker file to workspace. And this is because you have another extension called Docker installed. So you need to make sure that the Docker extension is installed. So if you just type Docker, you find a Docker extension by Microsoft. Install that. It is already installed for me. You can see that it is enabled Hence, I'm getting that option. So Control Shift P, Docker, and add Docker files to this workspace. Now, what essentially to do, it'll ask me a couple of things. So definitely this is an ASP.NET Core application. It's a Linux based, and this is the port against which the application will run locally. So when I go into that container and remote into that, it'll be running that in 5056. I don't need a Docker compose file because I'm not going to deploy it in the Docker thing. So this is the Docker file, which I don't have to type by myself. So it is done. So the Docker file is created. The the Docker thing is done. So what I can do now, I can run a very simple command to build this Docker image. Okay, so I go to the terminal and I say Docker. Now you need to remember that Docker file has to be in the same folder where you're running this Docker build command. So this has the Docker file. So you say cat Docker file. You see this Docker file is there. And then I go inside that and I say Docker build. Now, before I build that, I would like to show images available here in this local machine. So a bunch of images. You can see that there are a list of images. Now you make a count of it. You'll find a couple of them are there, but let me build an image. Now you can say to build an image in your machine. So you simply say Docker build and put a dot because your Docker file is here. Otherwise, you can provide the file path. Now it'll start building the Docker image, right? While it is building the Docker image, a couple of steps. Hopefully, it'll run without any trouble, much trouble, because it is very simple, nothing special added, etc. I can quickly show you the Docker registry which I have personally. So I can go to docker.io and you can also create a registry by yourself. It's a free thing and I have done that. So I go to the sign in, okay, and I use a hub.docker.com and log in using my credential. So when I log in using my credential, it takes me to the landing page and I have got a repository, right? This is wkosh. So I pick that name, okay, wkosh, and then give the image a name to it. Now, if I go back to this Docker build command, which I ran from Visual Studio, I can run this Docker build command with a name to it. So if I do that, right, and then I say -t, ensures the tag, and then I say wkosh slash, and I say demo web, and then I say v1. Okay, that's a version 1 of my web application. And if I run this, it is because it was built earlier, it's so quick. Now, if I say Docker images, you'll find the list of images, and one of them will be demo web. Okay, and this is the image I'm gonna use. Now, what I also need over here is that to be able to push it to the Docker Hub. Now, when even if it is a public repository, you still need access to that. So if I run Docker login, it was gonna go ahead and log into the Docker Hub. Now I logged in before, otherwise it'll ask me for the username and password, and it caches that, so it's cached. So you basically will be prompted. So provide the username and password, and it will automatically log into the Docker Hub by default. If you have a different repository, you need to provide the URL as part of the command. So Docker login and URL, and it will then log into that hub. So this is how you log in. I'm logged into my Docker Hub, hence I should be able to push that. So I say Docker push, and the image name is this one, okay? And I need to also provide the version tag. Now this is gonna go ahead and get everything from local, that is my dev VM, to the Docker Hub, okay? So you can see that a lot of uploads are happening. So when you do that, you need to make sure that, and it finds something similar. You can see that sample web is something which I tested before. So it found something, so it basically leveraging. So Docker is pretty bandwidth efficient solution, I must say. It doesn't really do unnecessary copies or create or occupy spaces, right? So you can see that it basically pushed the local container image to a public repository. Now I'm almost done. Okay. Now what I can do, I can go back to my black screen and I just say X. And before I go there, I just would like to test a run here. So I say Docker run, uh, not Docker run. I say .NET run. And if I say so, the run command is going to give me an option to open it in the local browser if you're running it from Visual Studio. So you can see that this application is perfectly fine, working. And if I just refresh it, I will see demo web is also one of the images showing up in my repository. So demo web is there. Okay. Now, if I go to my Kubernetes, if I go into my testing, and then I want to connect to the Kubernetes, right? There are a couple of ways to connect. So you need, first of all, kubectl. Once you have the kubectl, what you need is the credential. So because it uses certificate, so you need the certificate thumbprint. So let me show you how you can do that without remembering the complex command or the command. You go to the AKS thing, and then you say connect. If you do that, it gives you an option to make sure that you are in the subscription and you are connecting to that. Okay, let me do both. So let me go to this and make sure that subscription is connected, and then make sure that the credential is updated, and you can say kubectl and it get that. You can make an alias, which is I prefer. So alias kubectl get nodes. That's something you can always run because there will be nodes. And if it is connecting, it's fine. So I have created a 2-node cluster. So these are 2 worker nodes. It is showing up. Now I'm going to use my newly created application to build something. So I can create a pod. Now, if I create just a pod in Kubernetes AKS, I will not be able to browse that pod publicly because pod will have a private IP address, and I need to build something in AKS which will make this website as a public website. And to do that, I need to go step by step. So let me draw something. So when I build a pod, now this is a whole Kubernetes story. So it's K8s. When I build a pod and then take the container and take the image from my registry, it creates a pod all fine, but it is unusable as a public website. So I cannot use a HTTP public IP to reach out to that. This is pod, only pod. Now, ideally, you should not be creating pod in a production. What you will be doing is you will be creating a deployment. So deployment is essentially set up 1 or more pods running under a supervision which has got many additional capabilities like auto heal, etc. So you create a pod and a container. Now this deployment needs to be available for outside world, and to do that you create something called service. So this is another component in Kubernetes which will make sure that you get a public IP address and can be accessed outside. Okay, so this is what it is going to do. So let's create this step by step. I go here and I create a deployment. So since I did that alias thing, so I can say k create deploy. If I do that and I say demo web, let me give a name of deployment, and I say image, and the image is this one. So this is the URL of the image, if I'm right. And then I create this deployment. To check if the deployment is created, you can always say that. You can see demo web is not yet ready. It is ready. Just to check pods all are running. So demo web is the pod which is running. That means there is no error so far. It should work. Now I need to create a service. To create a service, I use the deployment and expose it. So that's how the kubectl is giving me an option quickly in the CLI. Otherwise, you can have an YAML file and build the service. So I can say k expose deploy demo web. That's the name of the deployment. And then you say that expose it to port 80, and the target port is 5056. Okay, so if you say 50656, remember this number. This number came from the Docker file. Okay, so let me show you that again. If you go to the Docker file and you see that 5056 is how this will run. Okay, so I need to expose this to port 80, but the target port will be 5056. The last important thing, if you don't do that, then it will not have a public IP address, is type. So this type is only available for public cloud-based managed Kubernetes service like AKS, where you can have a cloud controller manager and it'll create a cloud load balancer and then do all those things. For a typical cluster-based Kubernetes, you need to build those things by yourself through ingress control and etc. So imagine those complexities are not there. Now, what I'm typing as a type as load balancer will not work in the on-premises Kubernetes cluster. Okay, just remember that. So if I run that and I have that services created, k get svc, I just run it in the web. You can see that demo web is still pending. Now demo web has a public IP address. Okay, I got a public IP address. Now I stop it and I can curl it. Okay, curl HTTP just to do things in the thing. So it is showing some junk values. I would like to see how it looks like. So I go and then run it. And I can see that this is now in front of you using 20.44.195.224 as a public website, which essentially can run your application. Okay, just to quickly iterate through, let's say I change this application from my source file, demo modified. Okay, and then I go ahead and I run docker build and gives this to version 2. Okay, so this is just a simple version 2 because I made some changes. And once this version 2 is built, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to push it to the same Docker registry using the name version 2, using the tag version 2. So I say docker push v2, and it goes to, you can see that only one layer will be pushed because rest all layers are already there. Now once this is pushed, I can come back to this and then I go ahead and say k delete deploy demo web, and it will be deployed. And then I actually can run this same command with the version 2 tag. And because it is now created, I can run the same curl command, this from this, and then run it, and it shows the same thing. You won't find it because this is not the HTML page, and you can see that it is modified. So this is ideally you should do this through CI/CD pipeline, but I showed that change modification process how it should happen, right? So you get the sense that how we can build a ASP.NET application anywhere, Dockerize it, push it to a Docker registry, and then use that image from the registry to build a Kubernetes application. Hope you have enjoyed it, and thank you very much, and have a great day.